Confused on exactly what the investment options are inside the TSP? Stick around, I'm going to explain all of them. Welcome back, Furzonians. Today I'm talking to you live from the beautiful Sea Island in southern Georgia. Many of you are familiar with this area, especially if you ever went to Fletsy. I'm down here for a week, passing my days losing golf balls, shooting clay pigeons, and flirting with heat stroke. The good news is, this time I don't have to eat at the Fletsy Chow Hall. There's a lot better options here available at the resort. I'm not going to waste any more time, we'll get right into it. We're going to talk about the 5 funds available, your 5 investment options when you put money into your TSP every pay period. They are in order of most conservative to most risky: G, F, C, S, and I. Today we're going to focus just on the G. We'll do one video for each fund. Today we're going to talk about the original, the G fund. This started in April 1st of 1987, so it's the original fund inside the TSP. It's the original and it's the G, so you could call it the OG. My kids are going to hate that joke. Since it came out in 1987, it's averaged 4.6% a year. So the average annual return has been 4.6% over the last 37 years. That may surprise some of you. Some of you may think it's lower than that. And if you've only been looking at the TSP for the last 10 years or so, it has been quite lower. Sometimes less than 1% in a year. But the average long term has been over 4%. Last year was a little over 4%. This year we are going to be maybe not quite 4.6, but over 4%, between 4 and 4.5%. Which leads me to one of my first points. I see this all the time in the TSP Facebook pages. The G fund does not keep up with inflation. I see that. You've probably heard that. That's simply not true. Long-term inflation between 2 and 3%, depending on what time frame you're looking at. G fund has averaged 4.6, so it actually does beat inflation over the long term. Out of the 37 years, I think it lost to inflation maybe 7 or 8 times, but most of the times it beats it, and beats it by 50% or sometimes 100%. So over the long term, it does in fact beat inflation. So what exactly is in the G fund? When you're putting your money in there, what are you purchasing? Well, you're actually buying specially created treasury bonds that are unique to the TSP. So when you buy a bond, you're loaning an entity money. In this case, you're loaning the federal government money. And you may have heard treasury bonds. There's 2-year, 5-year, 10-year yields, 30-year treasury bonds. These are specially created treasury bonds made just for the TSP from the government. So when you invest in that, you are investing in government-issued securities. There are a couple of things that are really unique about the G fund compared to the other investments inside the TSP. One is that it is the only fund not available in the private sector. Everything else in the TSP is available at Charles Schwab, Merrill Lynch, Vanguard, Fidelity, Edward Jones, your choice of investment professional. You can buy the equivalent of the C fund, the S fund, and so on. The G fund you cannot buy outside of the TSP. It is unique only to the TSP. These treasury bonds that I talked about were created just for the TSP. So there is no exact duplicate of this in the private sector. That's number one. Number two is the G fund is also the only investment guaranteed to not lose money. Everything else in the TSP can and has at some point or another lost money. The G fund cannot lose money. It's guaranteed not to lose money. Every single day, these unique treasury bonds mature. Normally bonds are for a duration of a period of time, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Our treasury bonds for the TSP mature every single day. They're 100% liquid. Every day the share price of the G fund actually goes up as they attribute the tiny little bit of interest to your account. So each day the share price actually hits an all-time high because a penny or a fraction of a penny or a couple of pennies gets attributed to to the share price every single day. So those are a couple things that make the G fund unique. Not available in the private sector and guaranteed not to lose money. The corollary to that, it's also guaranteed to not make you a ton of money, which is okay because that's not really what it's designed for. The G fund is designed not to make you a ton of money. It's not for wealth creation. It's for wealth preservation. So the purpose of the G fund is really to protect the money that you've already made. If you're 25 years old, I don't really know why you would want to be in the G fund. You're there for the long term. You can afford to be more aggressive. You can go after stock market returns that we'll talk about in future videos. So I don't know if the G fund is really for an individual starting their career in their 20s or 30s. I do a little exercise in each one of my retirement seminars where we take 2 employees and we go back 25 years and we say, okay, they're both hired in 1999. One stays in the G fund their entire career. One stays in the C fund their entire career. Using actual numbers, today in 2024, the one that stayed in the G fund their entire career would have about $500,000 in there. Those are using real returns from the G fund over the last 25 years. Not bad, $500,000. However, the C fund employee, the person that stayed in the C fund the entire time for 25 years, never got in and out, would have 1.1 million. So $500,000 versus 1.1. So while it is true that you can't lose money by being in a G fund, that's not exactly the same thing as saying you can't lose out on money. And in that situation, using that example, the one employee missed out on $600,000 by staying in the G fund their whole career. So the G fund is not primarily for someone trying to create wealth, someone that's young, starting out in their career. But by the same token, a 55-year-old might want to start considering being in the G fund if they aren't already. You don't want to be 100% in the market in your 50s or 60s right before you start using some of your money. And then there happens to be a bad stock market crash or something and you lose 30% and the market stays down for years, which has happened. So again, the G fund is designed for someone that is trying to preserve some of the money that they've already made. In most people's investing career, you have essentially 2 phases. An accumulation phase, where you're trying to just build as much as possible. You can be aggressive, you can afford to, you have a longer investment horizon. And then you move into your preservation phase, where you're trying to protect the capital that you've made. Some people would argue that there's also a drawdown phase, but I would throw that into the preservation phase because you're still trying to preserve your money in a systematic way as you start to withdraw. So I said there's really no private sector equivalent of the G fund, but in each one of these videos, I'm going to try to give you some sort of way to replicate it in the private sector. If you wanted to do this in the G fund, then what you're looking for is basically something that is highly liquid, that is relatively stable and or guaranteed, and pays somewhere around 4 to 5%. So what exactly is that? Pretty much a high yield savings account. That's what we're talking about, or a money market. That performs the same function as the G fund. May not be 100% guaranteed by the government like the G fund, but the G fund is essentially the government's version of a high yield savings account. Today in 2024, there's a lot of people out looking for high yield savings accounts because finally, as interest rates go back to more of a normal average, we are starting to get paid interest on our deposits in banks and stuff. So high yield savings account is basically what the G fund is. Looking for that in the private sector, you're looking for a high yield money market, maybe a government bond fund, but something that is very liquid that pays between 4 and 5% a year in interest. So in summary, G fund, oldest, original TSP fund, been around since 1987. Averaged 4.6% a year over the last 37 years. Only fund not available in the private sector. Only fund guaranteed not to lose money. And the purpose of the G fund is not to build wealth, but to preserve wealth. All right, guys, that's pretty much the G fund. Next video up in the series, we'll talk about the F fund. That's our other bond fund in the TSP. We'll talk about that. Like, subscribe, comment below in the video any comments you have on the G Fund, whether or not you're in it, what you think about it, if you learned something new. Also put in your comment what's your favorite restaurant in St. Simon's. Crab Daddy's, Southern Soul Barbecue, what do you like best? Let me know. Until next time, take care of each other and feed that TSP.